The dusty street of Silver Creek fell silent when the stagecoach door creaked open. A girl, too young, too heavy, and trembling with shame, stumbled into the light. Laughter erupted, cruel and sharp, echoing off the wooden storefronts. Then the mountain hermit stepped forward. Elias Boone, a man who had lived alone for 15 years, took her hand, lifted it high for all to see, and declared, "This is my bride." The jeers died on the wind. What no one knew was that this act of mercy would set in motion a battle against law, greed, and the cruelty of men, a battle that would test whether faith and love could triumph on the frontier. But before that fateful moment, Elias had begun his mourning in the quiet stillness of the high mountains. He stood outside his cabin, surveying the rugged land that had been his only companion since the war. The Homestead Act of 1862 had promised 160 acres to any man willing to break the soil and prove it his own. Elias had taken that promise with calloused hands, carving a life from stone, pine, and loneliness. The cabin was sturdy, built of thick logs he'd cut himself, its small chimney puffing smoke against the crisp Wyoming sky. Beside him stood his mule, Moses, stubborn, faithful, and steady as the granite ridges above them. Elias had oiled his saddle the night before, brushed down his best coat, and trimmed his unruly beard with a soldier's precision. For 15 years, the mountain had kept his secrets. Today, he would descend to Silver Creek not as a hermit, but as a bridegroom. Inside the cabin, sunlight fell across the single room, sparse but clean. His mother's old Bible rested on a shelf worn soft by use. Elias opened it, his thick fingers tracing a verse he had read 1,000 times, yet needed most this morning. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." Psalm 23:1. He breathed deeply, as if those words could steady the storm inside him. For months, he had corresponded with a marriage broker, asking for a widow, mature, sensible, someone who would not expect romance from a man who had never courted. A woman who could share silence, who would not laugh at his awkwardness. Instead, rumors had spread like wildfire in Silver Creek. "The hermit has ordered himself a wife." Whispers carried down the valley faster than river water. Men joked in the saloon. Women exchanged looks by the churchyard gate. When the stage arrived today, there would be a crowd. He would be judged before he even laid eyes on the woman who was to share his life. Elias cinched the saddle tight and ran a hand down Moses's neck. The mule flicked his ears and snorted, more calm than his master. Elias adjusted his hat, squared his shoulders, and mounted. Each clop of hoof on stone echoed his heartbeat. The mountains fell away behind him, and the valley opened wide. He had faced musket fire at Shiloh, seen men fall on bloody fields, yet nothing unnerved him like the thought of meeting a wife he had never seen. Still, the Lord had not brought him this far to abandon him. Somewhere down that winding trail, past the gossip and the stairs, waited the woman who would change everything. The valley road curved into view of Silver Creek just as the church bell tolled 10. Elias Boone guided Moses down the last slope, his back straight though his stomach churned with dread. Ahead, the town stirred like a beehive. The general store's porch sagged under the weight of curious onlookers. Children perched on barrels, whispering and giggling. Men lounged by the saloon hitching posts, waiting for a show. The hermit of the mountains had come to town, and everyone meant to see it. Elias dismounted stiffly, his boots crunching against the packed dirt of Main Street. He tied Moses to the post outside the stage depot, ignoring the smirks thrown his way. "There's the hermit," someone muttered, loud enough to carry. "Reckon he bought himself a wife like you'd order a plow." Heat burned in Elias's ears, but he kept his gaze fixed on the road. He'd fought through worse storms than words. Still, he felt every whisper gnawing at him, every sneer reopening old scars of loneliness. Mrs. Henderson, the minister's wife, stepped forward with a polite smile. "Good morning, Mr. Boone. We're all so pleased you're finally taking this step." Her tone held more pity than kindness. Elias tipped his hat in silence, praying the ground might open and swallow him whole. Then came the sound he dreaded and longed for, the rumble of wheels, the thunder of hooves. The stagecoach appeared in a cloud of dust, 4 horses lathered with sweat as they strained against their harnesses. The driver reined them in sharply, dust settling over the wooden platform like a veil. "All passengers for Silver Creek," he called, snapping the brake chains. Elias's palms were slick inside his gloves. He gripped his hat brim tight as the door swung open. And there she was. Not the widow he had expected, not a matron of quiet dignity. Instead, a girl stepped down, barely 17 by the look of her, her dress faded and straining at the seams. Her round face flushed crimson beneath a battered bonnet. She clutched a small carpet bag in one hand and a sealed envelope in the other. Silence hung for a beat, then broke like glass. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Boys mimicked her heavy steps. A man muttered, "Looks like the hermit ordered 2 wives in one." Lydia Harper lowered her gaze, shoulders hunched, as if she could fold herself small enough to vanish. Her lip trembled. Tears glistened. Elias felt a storm rise in his chest, shame, anger, pity, and something fiercer still. This girl was not what he had asked for, but she was here, alone, desperate, cast out into the cruelty of strangers. She looked up then, meeting his eyes with a mixture of terror and pleading. "Mr. Boone?" she whispered, voice quaking like a leaf in autumn wind. Elias's throat tightened. Every eye was on him, every sneer, every mocking grin waited for his reaction. Slowly, he reached forward. His rough, scarred hand closed around her trembling one, and with a voice that rang clear across Silver Creek, he raised it high. "This is my bride." The laughter died. The crowd stilled. The declaration, simple yet defiant, carried more weight than any rifle shot. And so their battle began. If you found this helpful, a quick like really helps us keep creating. If you're still watching right now, drop a 1 in the comments so I know you're still with me on this journey. The laughter of Silver Creek still clung to the air like smoke after a fire. Even as the mules' hooves carried them away from the depot, Lydia heard the echoes, snickers, jeers, the cruel twist of boys' voices mocking her body. The town lay behind them, but shame traveled with her, heavy as the carpet bag she no longer carried. Her round shoulders hunched forward, bonnet pulled low, as if she might disappear into herself if she only stayed small enough. Elias walked beside the mule, one hand steady on the reins. His tall frame moved with the quiet strength of habit, boots crunching on the rocky trail. He did not look back at the town, nor did he speak, but his jaw was set, his silence alive with thought. Each cruel word thrown at Lydia had struck him as sharply as if it had been aimed at his own back. For years he had borne their whispers, hermit, virgin, fool of the mountain. But seeing her shrink under the same venom had awakened something different in him. A man could ignore insults to himself. It was harder to ignore them when aimed at someone placed in his care. The trail climbed gently upward. Aspens lined the slopes, their golden leaves whispering in the autumn breeze. The mule's ears flicked at the sound, steady as the mountain itself. Lydia dared a glance at Elias. His broad shoulders filled the space beside her, his Sunday coat still holding traces of dust from the depot. He looked unshakable. Yet when his eyes lifted to hers, she saw not scorn, but a quiet compassion that unsettled her more than the laughter had. No man had ever looked at her that way, without mockery, without pity, but with a kind of stern gentleness. At last she found her voice, thin and trembling. "My stepfather, he told me no one would ever want me. Said I was too much trouble, too much of everything wrong." Her eyes dropped to her hands, twisting the faded fabric of her dress. "He said I should be grateful anyone would take me at all." The words hung between them, bare and raw, like an open wound. Elias slowed his steps. For a moment he seemed to search for the right reply, his weathered hand tightening on the reins. Then, in a voice rough but certain, he spoke. "Your stepfather lied. Folks may look at the outside and find fault, but the good book says this. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." 1 Samuel 16:7. He turned his gaze fully on her then. "And I reckon the Lord's sight is truer than any man's tongue." A tear slipped down Lydia's cheek, catching the last of the sun's glow. She brushed it away quickly, ashamed of her weakness. But inside, something shifted, a small ember of hope against the ashes of humiliation. She dared not name it, not yet. But for the first time in years, the cruel voice of her stepfather was met with another voice, firm, steady, refusing to let her believe the lie. The mule plodded on, carrying them higher into the hills. Behind them lay ridicule and rejection. Ahead, a cabin waited, a new life neither of them had expected. Silence fell again, but it was no longer the silence of despair. It was the silence of two souls walking side by side, uncertain of the path, yet bound together by necessity, and by something even stronger beginning to take root. The cabin stood solid against the edge of the forest, its rough-hewn logs darkened by years of weather and smoke. To Lydia, it looked both humble and daunting. A single-room dwelling that spoke of solitude, of a man who had lived long without company. The thought of filling such silence with her own presence made her heart pound with uncertainty. Elias pushed the door open, stepping aside for her to enter first. Inside, the room was neat but sparse. A cot tucked beneath a quilt, shelves lined with jars of dried beans, and a Bible resting near the hearth. No woman's touch had softened the place. It was a space built for survival, not comfort. Lydia set her carpet bag near the door, suddenly aware of how large she seemed in the small room. "You'll find it plain," Elias said, almost apologetically. "But it keeps the snow off and the wolves out." Lydia nodded, unsure how to answer. She traced the patched quilt with her fingertips and whispered, "It feels steady." The days that followed unfolded with slow rhythm. Elias, awkward but patient, began teaching her the work of frontier living. He showed her where to gather kindling, how to split wood into pieces small enough to catch fire. His hands, scarred from years of labor, guided hers on the axe handle. "Steady pressure," he said. "Let the weight of the tool do the work." She wobbled at first, but determination steadied her strokes. In the mornings, he led her to the spring down the slope, teaching her to balance the bucket without spilling too much. "It'll slosh less if you keep your pace even," he noted, walking beside her as water splashed her skirts. Lydia flushed with embarrassment at her clumsiness, but Elias never mocked her, only adjusted his steps to match hers. The hearth became her domain. With flour and lard from his meager stores, Lydia baked biscuits that filled the cabin with warmth. The first batch came out heavy and dark, yet Elias ate them without complaint. "Best biscuits I've had in a long while," he said, and though his tone was plain, Lydia caught the glimmer of honesty. Her cheeks warmed. The second batch rose golden, light as clouds. His approving nod that evening made her heart lift higher than she expected. It was in the garden that they found the strangest harmony. The patch of earth behind the cabin lay ready but neglected, the soil dark and rich after autumn rains. Elias handed her a basket of seeds, explaining the practice passed down by neighboring tribes. "Corn, beans, and squash," he said. "The old ones call them the three sisters. Each one helps the other. Corn gives the beans a pole to climb, beans feed the soil, squash keeps the ground cool and shaded." Lydia knelt carefully, her hands pressing seeds into furrows with reverent care. "Mama used to talk about planting like this," she whispered, memories softening her voice. "She said the earth was kinder when plants kept each other company." For a moment, Elias only watched her, the way her round face glowed in the late sun, the steadiness of her touch. He had tended this soil alone for years, but seeing her hands in the earth filled the garden with a new kind of promise. When they finished, the rows stretched neat and sure, the seeds hidden beneath a blanket of soil. Lydia sat back on her heels, dirt streaking her hands, and smiled for the first time since leaving Silver Creek. "It feels like a beginning," she said. Elias met her eyes, the words slow but certain. "It is." Morning sunlight spilled across the clearing, catching the silver of Elias's axe as he split logs with steady rhythm. Lydia stood nearby, gathering the smaller pieces into neat stacks. Each thud echoed through the valley, sharp and sure. She worked quietly, trying to match his pace, though sweat already dampened the back of her faded dress. When the pile grew tall, Elias set the axe aside and lifted his rifle from the cabin wall. The weapon gleamed with use, its stock polished smooth. He studied Lydia for a moment, then said, "Reckon it's time you learned to use this." Her eyes widened. "Me? With a gun?" "Every frontier woman should know how," he replied simply.
"If I'm gone or trouble comes, you'll need to protect yourself." Nervousness fluttered in her chest, but she nodded. He guided her to the edge of the meadow where an old log served as a target. His hands, large and rough, adjusted her grip with care. "Keep the stock tight to your shoulder. Sight down the barrel. Don't rush the shot. Breathe steady. Squeeze slow." The rifle felt heavy, her arms trembling as she raised it. For a long moment she stood frozen, breath caught. Then, with a deep inhale, she pulled the trigger. The crack echoed off the pines. A splinter flew from the log, only inches from the knot Elias had pointed out. Her mouth dropped open. I hit it!" A grin tugged at Elias's beard. "Sure did." Excitement bloomed in Lydia's cheeks, and she asked to try again. Shot by shot, her aim grew truer, her confidence rising with each splintered mark. By the time Elias called a halt, she was laughing breathlessly, cheeks flushed pink. That afternoon, they worked in the garden, turning soil and checking the seedlings. A sudden strike of the hoe sent mud splattering across Lydia's face. She froze in shock, then laughed, a full, clear sound that rang against the mountains. Elias chuckled, something rare and warm, and teased, "Suits ya, most fetching mud I've ever seen." Her laughter only deepened, the sound surprising even herself. For the first time, the cabin yard felt alive with more than chores. It felt like companionship. As evening fell, the fire crackled bright in the hearth. Elias prepared beans while Lydia mended one of his worn shirts. The cabin glowed with lamplight, the silence between them gentle now, not heavy. After supper, Lydia folded her hands at the edge of the cot. Her voice rose softly in prayer. "Lord, thank you for this roof, for food to eat, and for the mercy you've shown me through kindness I never thought I'd know. Please help me learn, help me be worthy of this new beginning." Her words trembled, but carried a depth Elias could not ignore. He sat by the hearth, head bowed, though he said nothing aloud. In the flicker of firelight, his heart stirred with something unfamiliar, hope, and perhaps even grace. When Lydia lay down beneath the quilt, Elias spread his bedroll by the door. The mountain night whispered through the logs, owls calling in the dark. He stared at the ceiling beams, hearing again the quiet strength of her prayer. And though his lips never moved, his heart whispered back, "Amen." The wagon wheels creaked over rutted ground as Elias guided the mule down toward Silver Creek. Lydia sat beside him, hands folded tightly in her lap, trying to hide the tremor in her fingers. The thought of facing the townsfolk again set her stomach twisting, but she pressed her shoulders back. "I won't hide away forever," she had told Elias that morning. He had nodded quietly, respecting her resolve. By the time they reached the main street, Saturday bustle was in full swing. Merchants called out prices, children darted between wagons, and the air carried the scent of fresh bread from the bakery. But as soon as Elias helped Lydia down from the wagon, the whispers began. "There's the hermit and his bride." Poor girl, bless her heart.
She's too young, too big. What's he thinking? Each word stung like a nettle, but Lydia forced herself to walk tall, clutching the basket she had prepared. Inside, wrapped in clean cloth, were 2 pies she had baked that morning, 1 apple, 1 berry. She carried them straight to Miss Peterson, who stood before the mercantile. "I thought you might like to try these, ma'am," Lydia said, voice soft but steady. Mrs. Peterson hesitated, then lifted the cloth. The rich aroma rose warm and sweet. She cut a slice, took a bite, and her eyes widened. "Well now, this is finer than any pie I've tasted in years." She looked around at her neighbors. "Mark my words, this girl can bake." The words rippled outward. Soon others approached, curious, sampling, nodding with reluctant approval. A few even praised her openly. Lydia's cheeks flushed, not with shame, but with shy pride. For the first time since her arrival, she felt seen as more than ridicule. Later that evening, back at the cabin, Elias brought something from his pocket. His hands, usually so sure with tools, trembled slightly as he held it out. A comb, carved from smooth pine, its surface etched with simple flowing patterns. "I noticed your old one was broken," he said, eyes fixed on the fire. "Thought you might want something better." Lydia gasped softly, running her fingers along the delicate grooves. No one had ever made her a gift before, not with such care. Her voice caught. "It's beautiful. Would you put it in my hair?" Awkwardly, Elias gathered her thick brown locks, sliding the comb into place. For a moment, their faces were close in the lamplight, shadows dancing on the walls. Lydia's breath quickened. She could see the worry in his eyes, the fear of overstepping, the longing held in check. "Thank you," she whispered. Elias hesitated, then slowly, carefully leaned down. Their lips met in a kiss gentle as a prayer. No rush, no demand, only reverence. It was not passion that bound it, but choice. A man deciding to cherish, and a woman daring to believe she could be cherished. When they parted, Lydia's eyes glistened with tears, but her smile was radiant. "Never thought anyone would," she began, but words failed her. Elias's voice was low, rough with emotion. "You are worth everything." Outside, the wind whispered through the aspens. Inside, the cabin glowed not just with firelight, but with the warmth of a bond beginning to bloom. Tender, fragile, yet strong enough to carry them forward. The morning was crisp, sunlight threading through the aspens when the sound of hoofbeats carried up the trail. Elias straightened from the woodpile, frowning. Few riders ever came this far into the mountains. Lydia appeared in the doorway, wiping flour from her hands. "Someone's coming," she whispered. The rider emerged from the trees, a man in a fine coat, polished boots gleaming, his horse restless beneath him. He dismounted with practiced ease, adjusting his vest before striding toward the cabin porch. His smile was polished, but his eyes cold. "Mr. Elias Boone, I presume," he said smoothly. "Silas Dillard, agent for the Western Rail Trust." He pulled a folded document from his coat, the seal catching the light. "I regret to inform you, sir, that this young woman, Lydia Parker, was pledged by her guardian to settle certain debts. By law, she belongs to the trust until those debts are satisfied." The words hit like a blow. Lydia gasped, clutching her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "That isn't true," she cried, her voice breaking. "I never agreed to anything." Dillard shrugged, unbothered. "Your agreement wasn't required, my dear. As a minor, your stepfather's signature was quite sufficient." Elias's jaw tightened, the paper crackling as he snatched it from Dillard's hand. He scanned the lines, dense legal words, names, amounts. His gut twisted. The signatures looked real, but everything about the man reeked of deceit. "You're saying she's property?" Elias asked, voice low and dangerous.
Collateral, Dillard corrected smoothly, until the debts are cleared or until a legal marriage certificate proves otherwise. His smile thinned. And from what I gather, you never filed one. The truth cut deeper than he liked. Elias had planned to settle the matter in town after Lydia's arrival, but the chaos of those first days had swept the detail aside. Now it rose to choke him. Behind him, Lydia's voice trembled. "Please, don't let him take me." Her fingers gripped his arm, desperate. "I'll work harder. I'll learn faster. Just don't let them take me back." Something fierce ignited in Elias's chest. He stepped forward, placing himself squarely between Lydia and the intruder. His voice rang like iron on stone. "She ain't property, not yours, not the railroad's, not anyone's. She's under my protection. You want to drag her away, you'll do it over my body." Dillard's polite mask cracked, revealing a flicker of irritation. "Careful, Boone. The law doesn't favor men who stand in its way." He mounted his horse, pausing to tip his hat mockingly. "I'll give you time to consider, but I will return, and next time I won't come alone." The horse's hooves pounded away, leaving dust in the sunlight. Silence settled heavy on the cabin yard. Lydia collapsed against Elias, tears spilling unchecked. "He'll take me," she whispered, shaking. "He'll find a way." Elias wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight as his own fear gnawed at him. Yet his voice was steady when he spoke. "No, Lydia. The Lord did not send you here just to have you stolen away. We'll find a way. I swear it." The lamps of Silver Creek flickered as dusk settled over the valley. Elias urged the mule forward, his jaw set, Lydia trembling beside him. Every creak of the wagon echoed the dread between them. Neither spoke until the steeple of the little white church appeared through the evening haze. Inside the parsonage, Reverend Samuel Pike answered their knock. A tall, solemn man with kind eyes, he ushered them in without question. Lydia perched on a chair, shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders, while Elias remained standing, hat twisting in his calloused hands. "We need your counsel, Reverend," Elias began, voice raw. He laid Dillard's papers on the desk. "He claims Lydia's bound to the railroad by her stepfather's debt. Says unless we show a license, he can take her." Reverend Pike studied the documents with a practiced eye. "Forged, likely," he said, "but dangerous nonetheless. The railroad's men are skilled at cloaking lies in legal form." He opened a drawer and drew out a bundle of letters tied with twine. "I kept every correspondence regarding your match. These prove the arrangement was made in good faith, with Christian intent. But," his voice grew heavy, "the law requires more. A marriage license, issued by the territory, properly recorded. Without it, your claim may falter in court." Lydia's composure cracked. She covered her face, shoulders shaking. "Then it's true. He'll take me. All of this. It was never real." Elias knelt beside her, gently drawing her hands away. "Don't say that. What we've begun here is more real than any paper. You're my wife in God's eyes. And I'll not see you stolen away." Reverend Pike leaned forward, folding his hands. "The court can be stern, Elias, but Judge Hammond is a fair man. If we present the letters, my testimony, and file the license, we have hope. You must face this openly, with truth on your side." Silence hung thick. The crackle of the parsonage hearth was the only sound. Finally, Elias nodded. "Then we'll do it, whatever it takes. Tomorrow we face the court." Later that night, Mrs. Pike led Lydia upstairs, while Elias stretched out on a cot in the church stable. But neither found sleep easily. Lydia lay in the dark, tears dampening her pillow, the weight of shame and fear pressing down. In the quiet below, Elias knelt by the lantern's glow, his hands clasped hard, lips moving in prayer. "Lord, give me strength. Show me how to protect what you've given. I am not enough on my own, but with you—" His voice faltered, but his heart pressed on. The next morning, as sunlight spilled across the parsonage garden, Reverend Pike read aloud at the breakfast table, his voice firm. "Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate." Lydia's eyes met Elias's across the table.
Fear still lingered, but in that moment hope took root. They were not alone. If you're still watching right now, drop a 1 in the comments so I know you're still with me on this journey. The courthouse of Silver Creek had never held so many people. By the time the morning bell tolled 10, every bench was filled, and still townsfolk crowded along the back wall and spilled into the hallway, craning for a glimpse of the trial. The air carried a nervous weight, equal parts gossip and anticipation. This was not just a legal proceeding, it was a spectacle. At the front of the room, Judge Hammond adjusted his wire-rimmed spectacles and surveyed the crowd with a frown that warned against disorder. His black robe swept the floor as he took his seat behind the solid oak bench, gavel poised in one hand. A hush fell. Even the squeak of boots against the pine floor seemed loud. "Case of Dillard versus Boone," the bailiff announced, regarding the disputed custody of one Lydia Parker. Elias Boone rose slowly from his seat, Lydia's trembling hand clasped tightly in his own. He felt the stares of the entire town boring into his back, mockery, pity, curiosity. For years he had avoided these eyes, choosing solitude in the mountains rather than judgment. Now there was no turning back. He straightened his shoulders, silently reminding himself that this was the fight God had set before him. Across the aisle, Silas Dillard stood polished and smug in his tailored gray suit, a silver watch chain gleaming across his vest. With a flourish, he presented a stack of documents to the bench. "Your Honor," Dillard began smoothly, "here lies the matter plain. The stepfather of Miss Parker, one James Harrison, did sign and seal this contract last autumn. It binds the girl to service under the Western Rail Line until her majority, as payment for debts owed. She is, in effect, pledged property. Mr. Boone has taken her unlawfully, without regard to these obligations." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Lydia's cheeks burned red, her chin trembling as she tried to remain still. Elias's hand tightened around hers, steadying her against the rising wave of shame. Judge Hammond held up a hand for silence and leaned forward, peering at the papers. His brow furrowed. "You claim this contract is legitimate? Signed in Harrison's own hand?" Dillard said, lips curving into a self-satisfied smile. "Witnessed and notarized, all legal and binding." A murmur passed through the gallery. Some nodded grimly, as though convinced already. Others glanced at Elias and Lydia with pity. Elias could feel his chest tighten. The law was not written for men like him, hermits who spoke poorly in public, nor for girls like Lydia, heavy-set and unwanted. Dillard's voice carried the cadence of authority, of polished cities and money. Elias's rough, work-worn hands and plain speech would never sound as convincing. Yet he knew this much. Lydia was not property. She was not a debt, nor a burden. She was a child of God, entrusted to His care. And though his tongue felt clumsy, he would speak when called. Judge Hammond tapped the gavel lightly, eyes narrowing. "We will hear from the defendant next. Mr. Boone, you may stand ready." Lydia clutched Elias's arm as if to anchor herself. He squeezed back gently. There was no retreat now. Whatever came, they would face it together. Elias Boone rose when the judge gestured, the wooden floor creaking under his boots. He placed his battered hat on the rail before him, rough hands gripping the brim as if it were the only thing keeping them steady. The murmurs of the crowd died down, curious eyes fastening on the reclusive mountain man who so rarely appeared in town. Judge Hammond peered at him over his spectacles. "Mr. Boone, you may present your account." Elias cleared his throat, his voice low and uneven at first.
"Your Honor, I ain't one for fine speeches. Truth is all I've got." He paused, swallowing hard as he glanced at Lydia. She sat with her shawl clutched tight, her face pale but her eyes fixed on him with quiet trust. It gave him courage. "For near on 20 years, I lived alone up in those mountains," he began. "Folks called me the hermit, some called me worse. Truth is, they were right in a way. I never courted, never married, never even touched a woman's hand till this spring." He drew in a deep breath. "I reckon the town's whispers are true. I was the hermit virgin." A wave of gasps and stifled chuckles rippled through the gallery. The admission was raw, unvarnished, almost shameful. Elias felt his ears burn, but pressed on, his voice steadying. "But loneliness ain't a sin. It's a wound, and I sought a wife through honest means, through letters, prayin' for a woman who'd walk beside me in faith and work." He lifted his gaze, his voice gaining strength. "When Lydia stepped off that stage, I won't lie, I was surprised. She weren't what I pictured. She's young, heavy-set, worn from hard livin'. But then I saw the townsfolk laugh at her, point like she was some joke, and I knew in that moment the Lord had sent her to me, not for my pride, but for my keeping. For she is not unwanted, she is precious in His sight." Lydia's eyes filled with tears. Around the room, whispers stilled. The townsfolk who had sneered leaned forward now, listening. Elias's words rang plain but true, echoing against the wooden beams. "I took her hand before you all that day," Elias continued, voice deepening. "I declared her my bride not to shame her, but to shield her. I gave my word then, and I give it again now. She is mine to cherish and protect. No paper drawn by greedy hands can undo what God Himself has bound." His final words hung heavy in the hushed courtroom. Even Judge Hammond leaned back slowly, his face unreadable. For a moment, no one moved. The gallery was silent, but for the sound of Lydia's soft weeping, muffled behind her shawl. Elias lowered his gaze, his chest heaving as though he'd laid bare his very soul. He reached for his hat again, but did not sit until the judge gave a slight nod. "You may step down, Mr. Boone," Judge Hammond said gravely. "The court has heard your testimony." As Elias returned to his seat, Lydia grasped his hand with both of hers. Her tears spilled freely now, but so did her smile. When Judge Hammond called her name, Lydia Parker rose on trembling legs. The hem of her faded blue dress brushed the floor as she walked toward the witness stand, every step unsteady but resolute. She folded her hands before her, eyes lowered until the judge gently prompted, "Speak plainly, child. Tell this court your truth." Her voice wavered at first. "My mama, she died when I was 13. After that, I was left with my stepfather, James Harrison. He told me often that I was a burden, said no man would ever want me, said I should be grateful if anyone took me off his hands." Her cheeks flushed red, but she lifted her chin, forcing the words out. The room shifted. Several women in the gallery pressed handkerchiefs to their mouths. Men frowned, muttering darkly under their breath. Lydia swallowed. "When he sent me to the marriage bureau, I didn't protest. I thought maybe this was the only way left for me. But when I stepped off that stagecoach and heard the laughter, I wanted the ground to swallow me whole." She turned slightly toward Elias, her voice growing stronger. "But Mr. Boone did not laugh. He did not mock. He took my hand and lifted it high, as if I was someone worth claiming. That was the first time in my life I felt seen. Not for my size, not for what I lacked, but for who I was." A murmur of sympathy rippled through the room. Several women dabbed their eyes openly now. "Since then," Lydia continued, tears welling, "he's given me nothing but kindness. He taught me how to work the land, how to carry myself with dignity. He prays with me. He has never raised his voice at me, nor laid a hand in anger. He sleeps by the door at night while I take the bed, so I might feel safe. Tell me, is that the way of a man who would keep me as property?" Judge Hammond leaned forward, his stern face softened by the sincerity in her trembling voice. Dillard shifted in his seat, his polished composure cracking as the weight of her words turned the room against him. "I may not be the bride he expected," Lydia said, her voice now clear and ringing, "but he has been the husband I never dreamed I would have. The scripture says, 'Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her.' Ephesians 5:25. She clasped her hands tighter. "And though we've been wed only a short time, Mr. Boone has lived those words. That is the truth." Silence swept the courtroom. Only Lydia's uneven breaths broke it. Then, from somewhere in the gallery, a soft "Amen" rose, followed by another. A dozen heads nodded. Even the hardest faces seemed moved. Judge Hammond tapped his gavel once, more to steady the crowd than to silence it. "Thank you, Miss Parker. You may return to your seat." Lydia stepped down, her tears spilling freely now. But her back was straighter, her steps more certain. When she reached Elias, he took her hand firmly. For the first time in years, she did not feel unwanted. She felt chosen. When Lydia sat down, still clasping Elias's hand, the courtroom felt hushed but restless, as if the air itself awaited the next revelation. Judge Hammond cleared his throat. "Reverend Samuel Pike, you are summoned as witness." The old preacher rose from the gallery, his frame stooped yet steady, Bible tucked under one arm and a leather portfolio in the other. The room straightened instinctively as he approached. Few men in Silver Creek commanded as much quiet respect. "Reverend," the judge said, "what have you to present?" Pike adjusted his spectacles and laid the portfolio on the bench. His voice carried with calm authority. "Your Honor, I have here the original letters of correspondence between Mr. Boone and the Marriage Bureau in Kansas City. Every exchange was made openly and honorably, with intent of lawful matrimony. These are no backroom dealings, but the prayers of a lonely man seeking a wife in good faith." He placed several folded sheets before the judge. The wax seals cracked as Hammond examined them. Murmurs stirred in the gallery. Townsfolk leaned closer, eager to glimpse the truth. "That is not all," Pike continued, drawing out another folded page. "This letter comes from Lydia's own mother, written to me 2 years before her passing. It speaks of her daughter's age, 15 years at the time, and of her hope that Lydia might one day find a husband who would cherish her. By that reckoning, Lydia is now 17, nearly a full age. This is testimony of her character, her upbringing, and her worth in the eyes of the one who bore her." At this, Lydia covered her mouth with both hands, tears brimming anew. She had not known such a letter existed. Reverend Pike turned, his voice sharpening as he addressed the court. "And finally, I must speak to these so-called debt papers Mr. Dillard has produced. The seals are false. The ink is fresh, not the weathered hand of a man long in debt. I have seen such forgery before. Railroad men hungry for land, willing to twist the law to suit their greed. These are not contracts, they are snares." A sharp intake of breath rippled through the townsfolk. Dillard shifted in his chair, his jaw tight, his composure faltering. Judge Hammond leaned back, hands steepled. He studied the documents with piercing eyes. The silence grew thick. Finally, he spoke. "This matter is complex. Contracts of marriage, debts of guardianship, questions of age and consent all hang in the balance." His gavel tapped once, echoing like thunder. "Therefore, this court shall defer judgment until further review. However," He paused, gaze sweeping the room. "Until such time, Miss Lydia Parker shall remain under the protection of Mr. Elias Boone. She will not be taken from his custody." A collective exhale swept the benches. Relief bloomed on Lydia's face. Elias squeezed her hand, his jaw set firm. Whispers broke into quiet assent across the gallery. Mrs. Peterson dabbed at her eyes, murmuring, "Bless the girl." Even the blacksmith nodded approval, muttering to his neighbor, "That mountain man's got more honor than most." Dillard, however, did not smile. His eyes burned with cold fury, lips pressed into a thin line. For the first time, the predator looked cornered. And in that moment, the tide of Silver Creek began to turn. The courthouse had barely emptied when the tension spilled into the streets of Silver Creek. The townsfolk scattered into small knots of chatter, voices buzzing about forged contracts, the preacher's testimony, and Judge Hammond's delay. Elias walked with Lydia close at his side, her hand tucked into the crook of his arm. She tried to appear calm, but her wide eyes betrayed her fear. They were only halfway down the wooden steps when a harsh voice cut through the murmurs. "Deputy Wilson," Dillard called, striding forward, "I demand you uphold the law. The girl is still a minor. The debt papers stand until the judge rules otherwise. Arrest her." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The deputy, a broad man with weary eyes, shifted uncomfortably. His hand hovered over the badge on his chest, then drifted to rest near his gun belt. "Now hold on, Mr. Dillard. The judge just ordered she remain with Boone until further notice." Dillard's voice dripped venom. "The judge delayed his ruling. That means she is unbound. Do your duty, man, or are you afraid of one hermit with an axe handle?" A hush fell. All eyes swung to Elias. He moved Lydia behind him in one smooth motion, his frame broad and unyielding before her. His voice was steady, though his fists clenched tight. "You're not laying a hand on her. Not today, not ever." Deputy Wilson froze, caught between his orders and the railroad agent's pressure. Dillard stepped closer, his polished boots clicking sharply on the boards. "This isn't your choice, Boone. The law is clear, and the law is mine to wield." Elias's jaw tightened. He reached into his coat, not for his rifle, but for the worn leather Bible Lydia had placed there that morning. He held it up for all to see. "The law you twist is written by men, but this law," he tapped the cover, "this one says, 'The truth shall set you free.' John 8:32. And the truth is, she is no one's property." The words hung in the air, heavier than any threat. Lydia gripped the back of his coat, her tears brimming, yet her face glowed with fierce pride. Deputy Wilson's shoulders sagged. He looked at Dillard, then at the gathering crowd. The townsfolk were watching closely now, no longer jeering, but waiting, judging. The deputy shook his head slowly. "Not today, Mr. Dillard. Not on my watch." The murmur of approval from the townspeople swelled. A few even spat on the ground in Dillard's direction. Rage flashed in the agent's eyes, but he masked it with a cold smile. "Very well," he hissed. "Enjoy your small victory. But the clock is ticking. 3 weeks, Boone. Then she's mine by law, and nothing you say will change it." With that, he spun on his heel and stalked away, his polished coat snapping behind him. Elias felt Lydia trembling against his back. He turned, resting both hands gently on her shoulders. "We'll not walk this road alone," he whispered. "We'll seek counsel, and we'll pray. God's hand is stronger than his." Lydia nodded, swallowing hard. Together, they turned toward the parsonage, where Reverend Pike waited. Behind them, Silver Creek buzzed with a new energy, not mockery, but quiet respect. For the first time, the town was watching not with ridicule, but with hope. 3 weeks later, Silver Creek gathered once more in the courthouse. The air was thick with anticipation, the benches crowded with townsfolk who had followed every whisper of the case. Some came out of curiosity, others out of loyalty, but most came because they sensed that today would decide more than the fate of a young girl. It would decide what kind of town Silver Creek would be.
Dillard sat at the front, immaculate as ever in his tailored suit, his smirk restored. At his side lay a neat stack of documents, gleaming with official seals. He tapped his fingers on them with smug patience, like a man already victorious. Elias entered with Lydia on his arm. She wore the new calico dress Mrs. Pike had helped her finish, her dark hair pinned with the wooden comb Elias had carved. She looked pale, but her chin was high. Elias walked steady, boots striking the floor with quiet resolve. Reverend Pike followed close behind, Bible under one arm and a leather packet of letters under the other. "All rise," the bailiff called. Judge Hammond strode in, robes flowing, his face grave but not unkind. He took his seat, then fixed Dillard with a hard gaze. "Mr. Dillard, present your claim." The agent rose smoothly. "Your Honor, as before, I present binding contracts of indenture signed by Miss Parker's lawful guardian. The debts are substantial, and the law provides but one remedy. The girl belongs to the Western Rail Line until said debts are satisfied." He placed his hand dramatically on the papers. "All this talk of marriage is smoke and sentiment. The law deals in facts." A murmur of unease stirred in the gallery. "Reverend Pike," the judge said, "your evidence." The old preacher stepped forward, laying his documents upon the bench. "Your Honor, these are the original letters of agreement between Mr. Boone and the Marriage Bureau, letters I personally witnessed. Here also is the testimony of Lydia's mother, confirming her age and her hope that her daughter would one day be joined in holy matrimony. And lastly," he held up one of Dillard's contracts, "this so-called debt paper bears a false seal. I have compared it to true railroad documents. The emblem is forged, the ink scarcely dry. This is not law, it is theft." A hush fell. Judge Hammond studied the papers for a long moment. Then he slammed his gavel once. "Mr. Dillard, this court finds you guilty of fraud and attempted unlawful seizure." Gasps filled the room. Dillard shot to his feet. "This is outrageous!" "Silence!" the judge thundered. "You sought to bind an innocent girl as property. But this court recognizes what was plain from the first. Elias Boone and Lydia Parker entered this union in good faith, witnessed before God and community. By the authority vested in me, I declare this marriage lawful and binding. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no man separate." Matthew 19:6. Applause burst through the room, hesitant at first, then rolling like thunder. Mrs. Peterson wept openly. The blacksmith rose, nodding firmly. Even Deputy Wilson allowed himself a small smile. Elias turned to Lydia, lifting her trembling hand to his lips. Then, with courage he had never known before, he kissed her fully before all. She gasped softly, then smiled through her tears. In that kiss, the jeers of the past melted away. No longer the hermit virgin and the unwanted girl. Before God and all of Silver Creek, they were husband and wife, united, unbroken, and unashamed. If you like this video, please comment number 9. If you don't like it, please comment number 0. Summer settled over the mountains, painting the valley in rich greens and wildflowers. The meadows buzzed with bees, the streams ran swift with melted snow, and Elias's cabin no longer felt like a hermit's retreat. It had become a true home. In the garden, corn stretched tall, beans twined eagerly up their poles, and squash leaves spread wide to shade the soil. Lydia tended them daily, humming softly as she worked, her hands gentle but firm. The 3 sisters flourished under her care, just as she herself seemed to flourish in this new life.
Elias often paused from chopping wood or mending fences just to watch her. She moved with purpose, no longer shrinking into herself, no longer carrying the hunched posture of shame. Instead, her shoulders squared, her face glowed with health, and when she smiled, it lit the cabin brighter than any lantern. Neighbors who once mocked them now came calling. Mrs. Henderson arrived one morning with a basket of sugar and praised Lydia's pies. The Peterson boys who had once jeered now shyly asked her for biscuits, which she gave with a gentle laugh. The blacksmith tipped his hat respectfully whenever she passed through town. Slowly, the cruel whispers faded, replaced by nods of approval and quiet admiration. One Sunday, their cabin filled with neighbors for worship. Reverend Pike led hymns while children perched on stools and benches. Lydia taught the little ones to roll pie crust and knead dough, her face alight with patient joy. Elias listened as her laughter mingled with the hymn singing, and his chest swelled with something deeper than pride. That evening, after the neighbors left, Elias surprised her with a cradle he had carved from pine. The wood gleamed smooth beneath her fingers, each curve shaped with love. Tears filled Lydia's eyes as she traced the delicate carvings along its side. "For our future little ones?" she whispered. Elias nodded, his throat tight. "Reckon this cabin's ready for more than just the two of us." She pressed her cheek against his chest, her tears soaking his shirt. "No one ever made me feel wanted until you. Now I feel cherished." He held her close, silently thanking God for the gift of this woman who had turned his solitude into abundance. As the months passed, Lydia's confidence blossomed. She read scripture aloud by the fire each evening, her voice growing stronger with every verse. One night she read, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul." Psalm 23, 1-3. Elias bowed his head, moved by the truth that these words described not only God's care, but the peace he had given them together. By autumn, their shelves brimmed with jars of preserves, their cellar full of potatoes and dried beans. Chickens clucked contentedly near the barn, and the cabin smelled of fresh bread nearly every day. When the mountain winds began to cool, neighbors gathered for harvest suppers, praising Lydia's baking and Elias's hearty garden. One evening, as the sun dipped behind golden aspens, Elias and Lydia stood together at the edge of their fields. The valley stretched wide before them, alive with color. Lydia slipped her hand into his, and he squeezed gently. "We've come a long way," she whispered. He looked at her, his eyes soft. "Longer than I ever dreamed, but it was the Lord's hand guiding us." Together they stood, the once lonely mountain man and the girl no one wanted, watching the land flourish around them. Where there had once been ridicule, there was now respect. Where there had been loneliness, there was now love. And where there had been despair, there was now faith renewed. The cabin glowed with lamplight behind them, a beacon of hope in the wilderness. And for the first time in either of their lives, Elias and Lydia knew what it meant to belong, not just to each other, but to a greater story of redemption written long before they had ever met. Autumn swept across the mountains like fire, painting the slopes in crimson, amber, and gold. The aspen leaves shivered in the brisk wind, and the cabin's stone chimney sent a steady plume of smoke curling into the clear blue sky. Inside, the shelves gleamed with jars of preserves Lydia had labored over all summer: peaches, berries, applesauce. The rifle above the door rested quietly, no longer a weapon of defense, but a reminder of battles fought and won. A fresh quilt, pieced together by Lydia's hands, spread neatly across the cot that was now theirs together. Each evening, the couple shared simple meals by the hearth: hearty stews, fresh bread, butter churned by Lydia's determined arms. After supper, she would hum Amazing Grace, and Elias, once too shy to raise his voice, now joined her in harmony. Their voices blended, strong and sure, filling the cabin with warmth. On Sundays, neighbors gathered more frequently at their home. The Hendersons, the Wilsons, and even the Peterson boys came, not to mock, but to learn. Reverend Pike would read scripture, and Lydia often led the singing. Children clustered around her as she taught them to roll biscuits or weave corn husks into dolls. She no longer saw herself as unwanted, for here she was the heart of a growing fellowship. Elias, once known only as the virgin hermit, was now spoken of with respect. Men who had laughed at him now sought his counsel on planting, trapping, and prayer. He carried himself with quiet authority, not as one who demanded respect, but as one who had earned it through steadfastness. One evening, as the wind howled outside, Elias set down his Bible and reached across the rough-hewn table, clasping Lydia's hands in his. His voice was thick with gratitude. "Lydia, all my life I thought I was too plain, too quiet, too awkward for God to give me a family. But then He brought you. You've made this cabin a home. You've made me a better man." Her eyes glistened in the firelight. "And you've shown me I was never worthless. You claimed me when no one else would. You defended me when I could not defend myself. You've loved me as Christ calls a husband to love his wife, with patience, with sacrifice, with honor." Elias swallowed hard, then whispered the verse that had sustained him. "Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her." Ephesians 5:25. Lydia smiled through her tears. "And wives are called to respect their husbands. I do, Elias, with all my heart." They prayed together then, heads bowed close, the fire crackling behind them. Their words were simple but sincere. Thanksgiving for mercy, for provision, for a love neither had believed possible. Weeks later, as the first snow dusted the peaks, the town gathered for a harvest feast in Silver Creek. Long tables filled the square, laden with roasted meats, steaming vegetables, and pies of every kind. When Elias and Lydia arrived hand in hand, the crowd parted with smiles of welcome. "Come sit here, Mrs. Boone," Mrs. Henderson insisted, guiding Lydia to a seat of honor. The men clapped Elias on the back, praising his crops, his steady mule, and his steadfast character. As the feast began, Reverend Pike stood and lifted his voice. "Friends, tonight we celebrate more than harvest. We celebrate God's goodness in binding two hearts that once knew only loneliness. Their story is a reminder to us all. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." 1 Samuel 16:7. The crowd murmured agreement, many wiping their eyes. Elias and Lydia exchanged a glance across the table, their fingers finding one another's beneath the wood. That night, as lanterns glowed and laughter rang through the town, Lydia rested her head against Elias's shoulder. "We belong here," she whispered. Elias kissed her temple, his heart swelling with peace. "We belong to Him, Lydia, and He's given us each other." The stars blazed bright above the mountain town, the same stars that had once witnessed their loneliness, now bearing witness to their covenant. Not just a marriage sealed by law and community, but a union blessed by God Himself. In the quiet certainty of that truth, Elias and Lydia knew they were no longer outcasts. They were husband and wife, partners in faith, builders of a legacy that would endure long after autumn's leaves had fallen. As the firelight dimmed and the mountain winds carried whispers through the pines, the story of Elias and Lydia reached beyond their cabin walls. Their struggle was not just their own, it was the struggle of every soul who has ever felt unwanted, laughed at, or cast aside. Their triumph reminds us that love, dignity, and faith can outlast ridicule, law, and even fear. And perhaps that is why such tales linger in our hearts. They speak to the ache we all carry, the desire to be seen, chosen, and cherished. In their victory, we find hope for our own battles, large and small. If this journey touched your heart, you are part of it too. Subscribe and follow along, because tomorrow I'll share another of these true Wild West stories, tales of grit, mercy, and faith that remind us who we are and what we can still become.